Picture this, a car door slides open, and the B-pillar is just gone. Not thin, not hidden behind trim. Gone. A full uninterrupted opening that feels closer to a lounge entrance than a vehicle designed to survive a crash test. For 100 years, that pillar has been the non-negotiable rule of car safety. Engineers treat it like gravity. You can reshape it, reinforce it, disguise it, but you don't delete it. Because the moment a side impact happens, that's the spine that keeps the roof from folding the cabin, from collapsing the passengers, from becoming statistics. And yet here we are, watching a Chinese engineering play that doesn't just challenge the rule, it insults it. This isn't a concept car fantasy. This is a production-minded idea built around a simple, terrifying question. What if you could remove the B-pillar and still be stronger than cars that never dared to try? That's the bait, but the real hook is the trick. Because they didn't remove the pillar. They moved it into the doors. 2 hidden steel towers. When the doors close, they lock into the floor, and the roof like a vault sealing shut. The empty space you see when it's open is basically a magic act. The strength shows up only when it matters, when everything is closed, latched, and ready to take a hit. And if that sounds like overkill, that's the point. The steel they're bragging about isn't normal auto steel. It's the kind of number you usually hear in military and aerospace conversations, hot stamped ultra high strength material that's supposed to make impossible structures possible. So today isn't just about a weird door design. It's about what happens when the old world rules of car architecture start getting rewritten by people who aren't asking for permission. To understand why this feels like heresy, you have to understand what the B-pillar actually does beyond holding up the roof. It's the structural checkpoint of the entire car. It's where side impact energy gets intercepted and redirected. It's where the roof strength test lives or dies. It's where the seatbelt anchoring becomes viable without turning into a medieval spear in a crash. It's also why most cars feel like they have a doorway, not a wide open stage. And that doorway is not a design choice. It's a compromise built from fear. Fear of what happens when a 4,000-pound object hits you in the ribs at highway speed. That's why Western automakers have treated pillarless cabins like party tricks, reserved for low production coupes, old-school hardtops, or luxury convertibles that accept compromise as part of the aesthetic. The moment you want mass production, strict crash regulations, and real-world durability, the pillar comes back. Always. Because if you remove the B-pillar, you don't just lose a post, you lose the cage. The roof becomes weaker, the side intrusion distance shrinks, the doors become longer, heavier, harder to seal. Wind noise gets worse, the body flex increases, and suddenly, the car that looked futuristic starts feeling like a nightmare to engineer. So when a Chinese brand walks in and says, "We'll delete it," the reason it lands like a slap is not arrogance. It's what it implies. They're not trying to win on styling. They're attacking the architecture, the part of the car the industry has treated as untouchable. And it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening at the exact moment the EV platform gives engineers a different set of physics to play with batteries in the floor. A flat interior, no giant transmission tunnel, fewer packaging constraints, and a completely new priority-less space modularity autonomy. So the question becomes sharper than can they do it? The real question is, why are they doing it now, and what does it signal about where the industry's going? Because if this trick works, it doesn't just sell a car. It rewrites what a normal car cabin looks like for the next decade. Here's where the pillarless story stops being a gimmick and starts being a mechanical strategy. Because the B-pillar didn't disappear. It was relocated. Instead of a fixed structural post welded into the body, the load-bearing structure is split into 2 vertical reinforcements, one inside each sliding door. Think of them as 2 hidden towers that travel with the doors. When the doors are open, you see a clean, uninterrupted gap. That's the illusion. But when the doors close, the real architecture snaps into place. The trick is not just steel, it's the lock. Once shut, those door-embedded pillars don't merely latch the way normal doors do. They lock into the floor and into the roof rail, turning the whole side of the vehicle into a sealed vault. In other words, The cabin only becomes a cage when the system is closed and engaged, exactly the moment you need it to resist a side impact. And this is why the material flex matters. The brand narrative leans hard into a number that sounds almost absurd for automotive ultra-high strength hot stamped steel with tensile strength around the 2000 megapascal class. Numbers like that aren't marketing fluff in isolation. They explain how you can shrink a beam, hide it inside a door, and still claim it can carry brutal loads. But the more important point is what this design is trying to solve. A side impact doesn't just push in, it twists. The roof wants to shear the floor, wants to buckle, and the opening becomes the weak point. Traditional B-pillars fight that by being permanent continuous and triangulated into the body. This door-based system has to recreate that continuity every time it closes without gaps, without misalignment, without almost fitting. So the engineering war here is about precision and repeatability. Can the door seal perfectly every time? Can the locking points survive years of wear? Can the structure remain rigid at speed and temperature swings under vibration? And can it still work when a crash happens at the worst possible angle? That's why the competitor script loves vault language, because it's not only describing strength, it's describing a philosophy. The car becomes structurally whole only when everything is engaged. Now, if you're thinking, wait, if the pillars are in the doors, aren't the doors insanely heavy? You're asking the right question. This is where an EV platform becomes the enabler again. Sliding doors, electric actuation, a battery floor that stiffens the base, and modern packaging all make it plausible to add mass in the doors without turning the car into a flexing, squeaking disaster. So no, this isn't they remove the pillar. This is they turn the door itself into the pillar. And once you understand that, the rest of the vehicle starts reading differently. Because this isn't only about safety. It's about unlocking a completely different interior geometry, one that old car architecture couldn't support without breaking. Once you've freed the side opening, the next move is obvious. You stop designing a car like a car, and you start designing it like a room that can move. But that only works if the thing is actually usable in the places people live. Tight cities, parking garages, curbside pickup zones, rideshare drop-offs. And this is where the competitor script shifts from safety stunt into something more dangerous, urban domination, through packaging. They claim steering angles pushing beyond the traditional comfort zone over 50 degrees, paired with a turning radius around 4.95 meters. The line they love to drop is basically, this big box rotates like a small hatch. Not in the poetic sense, in the humiliating spreadsheet sense. Here's why that matters. Legacy cars, especially internal combustion vehicles, carry a packaging tax. You have an engine layout, a transmission tunnel, drive shaft routing exhaust paths, mechanical steering columns, and suspension geometries that have been optimized for decades, but also locked into habits. Even modern EV conversions built on compromised platforms inherit some of that stiffness, space-wasted steering limitations, bulky front packaging. A dedicated EV architecture is different. The battery is the floor. The cabin can sit where it wants. The front can be shortened or rebalanced, and crucially, you're no longer negotiating with the same mechanical constraints that forced every car to be a long rectangle with an awkward turning circle. So if you're building a vehicle meant for dense urban movement, especially something that wants to live in the autonomous taxi world, turning radius isn't a small spec. It's a business model. Every meter matters. Tighter U-turns, easier curb approach, smoother lane changes, less time correcting steering, better maneuvering in chaos. And that's why the competitor keeps comparing it to European city cars. Because it frames the message as the West spent decades perfecting small car agility, and China just copied the outcome into a larger form factor. It's not just this is impressive, it's your definition of what's possible was limited by your architecture. When you combine that with the pillarless opening, you start to see the product logic. The vehicle is being optimized for frequent stops, fast entry/exit, and effortless motion through tight urban geometry. In other words, it's not a van trying to be cool. It's a platform trying to own the city. And once you accept that framing the interior design choices stop looking like luxury and start looking like strategy. This is the moment the vehicle stops acting like transportation and starts acting like a living space. The competitor script leans into the mobile lounge fantasy for a reason. Once you create that wide pillarless opening, you can design the cabin like a room with movement social geometry and modules rather than a cockpit designed around a driver. So you get the theatrical details front seats that can swivel dramatically up to a near full rotation, turning the first row into a face-to-face conversation layout. A center module that isn't a fixed console anymore, but something closer to furniture, where a table can emerge, pivot, and turn the space into a boardroom, a dining nook, a laptop station. And here's why that matters strategically. It's not about comfort. It's about redefining value. In the old world, value came from horsepower brand heritage leather trim. In this new play, value comes from what the interior can become, how quickly it transforms, how it supports different uses, how it feels like time saved instead of miles traveled. But then they do something that seems almost unnecessary, almost arrogant. They keep the performance numbers loud. Not supercar loud, but loud enough to sound like an insult to the idea that this is just a box. Think roughly 415 horsepower territory, with 0 to 62 miles per hour in the mid-fives. That's the contradiction they want you to feel. How can something designed like a lounge still accelerate? Like it's trying to embarrass sporty cars. And that contradiction is not accidental. It's messaging. It says the comfort is not a compromise. The space is not a penalty. The room doesn't mean slow. This isn't a minivan that apologizes for being practical. This is practical, made powerful. And it's supposed to trigger a psychological shift in the buyer. If a family shuttle can move like this, what does that say about the rest of the market? Because once EV torque becomes normal, the old hierarchy starts collapsing. Fast is no longer rare. Fast becomes a baseline. Then the question becomes, what else can you offer? The answer this vehicle is trying to sell is an interior that feels like future living, paired with enough punch to make you stop calling it a van. And that's why the competitor script treats the cabin like a weapon. It's not just showing features. It's showing what happens when the industry stops designing for a driver and starts designing for the people inside. Now add this to the turning radius story, and the pillar trick, and the bigger picture becomes obvious. This vehicle isn't competing with traditional cars. It's competing with the idea of what a car is supposed to be. If the doors are the architecture flex, then steer-by-wire is the future flex. Because the moment you remove the mechanical steering column, the physical shaft that connects your steering wheel to the front wheels, you're doing two things at once. You're deleting a piece of 20th century machinery, and you're opening the door to a completely different 21st century interior. In a traditional car, the steering column is more than a component. It's a structural constraint. It forces the driver position, the dashboard shape, the crash packaging, and the entire relationship between human and machine. And in severe frontal crashes, that column has historically been one of the uglier hazards engineers have had to mitigate, because a rigid shaft pointing at the driver is not exactly a friendly thing when physics turns violent. Steer-by-wire replaces that direct mechanical link with electronic control and actuators. Your wheel becomes an input device like a flight stick. The car interprets your command, then turns the wheels through motors and control systems. That sounds abstract until you realize what it enables. First variable steering feel. One steering ratio for parking, another for highway stability, another for lane changes. You can tune response without being locked to fixed geometry. Second, packaging freedom. Without a column, you gain flexibility in dashboard layout, knee room, and the entire front cabin structure. Suddenly, driver cockpit isn't forced to be a cockpit. Third, and this is where the competitor script is really going, autonomy alignment. Because in a world where a vehicle is expected to operate as a robo-taxi, a steering wheel is no longer a permanent identity. It becomes optional. It becomes something that can fold away, retract, disappear, or sit dormant until a human needs it. Steer-by-wire makes that concept not just aesthetic, but physically possible. And when you put it next to the pillarless opening and the lounge interior, the message locks in. This is not a car designed around a driver. It's a vehicle designed around occupancy, people moving, entering, exiting, working, talking, while the machine handles the motion. Now, of course, this raises the uncomfortable question. What about reliability? When you replace mechanical linkage with electronics, your entire safety story depends on redundancy, fail-safe modes, power backup, sensor integrity, and software control. In aviation, fly-by-wire works because redundancy is sacred. Cars have to earn that trust on public roads. But that's exactly why steer-by-wire is such a statement. It signals confidence not only in hardware, but in the software stack, and in the idea that the future of driving is not more mechanical purity, but more controlled automation. In other words, they're not just changing how you steer, they're changing what steering means. Up to this point, the vehicle has been selling you a new kind of space, a new kind of movement, a new kind of car. But the competitor script knows there's still one excuse that can kill any EV story in the real world, especially in America: charging time. You can have the smartest packaging, the wildest interior, the coolest autonomy setup, and the average buyer will still ask the same brutal question. Yeah, but how long am I stuck waiting? That's why they bring in the 800-volt architecture, like it's a final weapon. The headline number they love is the kind of spec that sounds designed to end arguments roughly 10% to 80% in about 10.5 minutes under the right conditions. Now, you and I both know real charging performance depends on temperature charger capability, battery preconditioning, and the charging curve itself. But the narrative isn't trying to teach battery science. It's trying to do something more strategic. It's trying to remove psychological friction. Because what people hate isn't electricity. What people hate is uncertainty. The feeling of being trapped at a charger, watching minutes bleed away, wondering if the station will work, if the speed will drop, if the line will move. So if you can credibly push fast charging into a time window that feels like a normal fuel stop 10-ish minutes, not 40, then the argument shifts. The question stops being, is EV charging too slow? And becomes, why are some EVs still making me wait? And that's the hidden war, not just between brands, but between architectures. 800 volts isn't only a charging brag. It signals a system built for higher power delivery, different thermal management demands, different component sourcing, and in many markets, a different class of charging infrastructure. It's a statement that the vehicle expects to live at the high-speed edge, not the good enough middle. This is where the competitor's tone turns almost predatory. They want you to feel like the last wall between you and EV adoption is being smashed, so the old excuses collapse, and the old players look slow, outdated, and complacent. And when you connect it back to the rest of the design, the lounge cabin, the door vault pillars, the steer-by-wire autonomy alignment, you see the full cell. This isn't just a weird futuristic box that charges fast. It's a platform designed to erase the traditional pain points one by one until the buyer is forced to confront a more uncomfortable truth. Maybe the future isn't coming. Maybe it already showed up, and it just doesn't look like the cars we're used to. Now here's where the story stops being just a car and starts feeling like a geopolitical hack. Because America has spent the last few years tightening the gate tariffs, restrictions, political pressure, and a growing instinct to treat Chinese EV platforms as something you keep out, not something you let in. And yet this vehicle, this architecture, still finds a way to show up in the US conversation. Not through a dealership, not through mass consumer sales, but through the one channel that plays by different rules: big tech. That's the Trojan horse framing the competitor script is obsessed with. If a company like Waymo is building a future where cars are not products but autonomous services, then the purchasing logic changes completely. Waymo isn't shopping like a normal customer. It doesn't care about brand loyalty. It doesn't care about American-made pride the way political debates do. It cares about three brutal metrics: interior space efficiency for passengers' entry/exit and comfort, reliability and scalability fleet uptime maintenance patterns, platform readiness for autonomy, electronics redundancy packaging. And suddenly, the pillarless opening isn't a party trick anymore. It becomes a fleet advantage, In a robo-taxi world, every second matters. Faster entry and exit means higher throughput. Better turning radius means less time wasted in tight zones. A cabin that behaves like a room means passengers treat it like a service upgrade, not a compromise. Steer-by-wire becomes an autonomy-aligned architecture choice, not a futuristic flex. So when the competitor says infiltration, they're not talking about smuggling. They're talking about a system problem. Even if the US tries to block Chinese EVs at the consumer level, American tech companies can still adopt the platform logic because they're buying capability, not identity. And that's the uncomfortable implication for legacy automakers. Because if big tech starts selecting best platform wins vehicles for fleets, then the old competitive moat brand dealer network's heritage doesn't protect you the same way. The market begins to split. Cars as emotional products, traditional consumer buying. Cars as scalable infrastructure, autonomous fleets. In the second market, the rules are colder. Performance and packaging beat nostalgia. Architecture beats storytelling. And if a Chinese platform can win there, it doesn't just win a contract, it sets a template. That's why the Trojan-Horse metaphor hits so hard. It suggests the disruption doesn't need to kick down the front door. It can enter through the side gate, through services fleets, and the autonomy arms race until the normal industry realizes the architecture war is already lost. And then the final question becomes unavoidable. If the future of mobility is a service, who controls the platform underneath? This is where the competitor script goes for the throat comparison. Because once you've shown the pillar illusion, the turning circle flex, the lounge cabin, steer-by-wire alignment, and 800-volt charging, there's only one way to make the point land emotionally. Put it next to something the audience recognizes, and let the contrast do the violence. The obvious target is the retro-style electric van everyone loves to talk about vehicles, like the ID Buzz and its new old charm. The competitor isn't arguing that the West can't build cool electric people movers. They're arguing something sharper. The West is still building cars that feel like cars. China is building platforms that feel like the next category. And the scoreboard they imply is brutal. Entry/exit, wide open stage versus traditional doorway. Urban maneuvering, small car turning circle versus big vehicle awkwardness. Interior logic room that transforms versus cabin that stays fixed. Autonomy alignment, steer-by-wire readiness versus old control assumptions. Charging narrative 10-minute window versus the long wait that keeps fear alive. Whether every comparison is perfectly fair isn't the point. The point is the psychological effect. Once you see a platform that removes friction in multiple places, everything else starts looking like it's solving yesterday's problems. And then comes the final punch, the old world line. Not as a meme, more like a diagnosis, that the legacy auto industry is still optimizing within familiar constraints, while China is treating the entire architectural template as optional. So the outro message isn't "this car is better." It's "this is a warning." If the architecture war is shifting from engines to platforms, from styling to packaging, from driving pleasure to occupancy experience, then the winners won't necessarily be the brands with the loudest history. They'll be the ones who control the stack materials, electronic software, charging architecture, and fleet readiness. And once that's true, the scary part isn't that a single Chinese vehicle looks impressive. The scary part is what it suggests that the next wave of mobility may arrive in America, not as a car you buy, but as a service. You summon built on a platform the old industry didn't design, didn't anticipate, and maybe can't catch up to fast enough. So here's the real question to end on. If the B pillar, one of the oldest rules in automotive engineering, can be rewritten, what other laws are about to get broken next?